Welcome back to the SaaS Playbook, the podcast that gives founders and leaders in the B2B space a real platform to unpack what they're building, why it matters, and what journey actually looked like to get there. This episode is brought to you by Hera Digital, revenue architects who build the sales engines B2B businesses actually need from top of the funnel all the way down to close. Head to heradigital.com.au to find out more. Today's guest is doing something genuinely different. He's a co-founder of SurgiBox, a company building portable, sterile surgical infrastructure that can be deployed in crisis zones, remote regions, and under-resourced hospitals around the world. From Ukraine to Japan to the Middle East, they're solving a problem most people don't even know exists. And the scale of the opportunity is enormous. Sasha, welcome to the show.
Hi, Jenny. Thank you for inviting me to your show. It's a pleasure to be here.
So if we look at SurgiBox in its early days, we're taking a few steps back and going down memory lane now. SurgiBox started as a university project. And you came in really early with your co-founders, right? So helping raise that first 200K, the first million, and we built first partnerships really early on. But what made you go all in, and what did those early years actually look like on the ground?
It's a great question. So going back on memory lane, so Debbie Theodorescu is the clinician who had the idea behind, and I actually met her through my university when she came to present a paper in Lausanne in Switzerland. And at that time, they had just won the Harvard President's Challenge. So then joined, and basically I was kind of fresh out of the university. So for the first 8 months, I didn't know what I was doing. So, which I mean, yeah, when you're like 24, 25, it happens. But I think the team was really great. And so I think the first thing is, okay, first 8 months, we need money. We need to raise it. And so how do you raise money? That's the first question. And so it's a mix of grants, fundraising, meeting different investors. And what really made this happen is the first 250K that we got from Grand Challenges Canada, who has been a very long supporter since the beginning, actually. And so that was great because I could pay myself and we could also pay for the first employee. And this really made this happen. And okay, we can go full all in. This plus the partnership that we had originally with Doctors Without Borders Switzerland. And so these two really, okay, we have something that it's a good solution theoretically, but then with this partnership and people willing to put in money, it's where it's getting real. People are willing to use it, and this is actually solving a problem.
Unfortunately, it's the other side of health that we don't really look into or don't really think about, right? When we first spoke, what really stood out to me is the focus on what happens in the field, right? Like, because that's where it's the most critical when we talk about surgeries and timelines into getting surgery in to save someone's life, right? So it's quite critical. And I think the focus on that is, again, what people don't really think about. And I think that's where SurgiBox really comes into play. And you can tell by the early investors and the early partnerships that people see this thing actually, there is a need for it, but also how applicable is it, just even from every big end scale, but also small everyday use as well. Because again, it doesn't matter where you are, what the situation is. If you need a surgery at that time, you need a sterile environment. So really looking forward to getting into what we can explain to the listeners and the viewers what the SurgiBox actually do. Hardware is really a completely different beast to software. The regulatory requirements, the manufacturing, the logistics of moving a physical product across borders of the most complex environments in the entire world. What's the one thing that surprised you most about building in this space that you genuinely didn't see coming?
So I think this is what in the beginning and when you make something in the lab and actually the complexity to industrialize it. So I think making the machine is easy, but making the machine that makes the machine is where the complexity is there, because that's the only way. If you have a machine that makes the machine, that's the only way you can sell hardware, or else each product you're going to make is custom made, right? And you have to industrialize it. And the complexity, when basically you have done the kind of benchtop proof of concept in your lab at the university, and somehow, okay, the prototype I built works, you are at maybe 1%.
It's a long road to go, right? And that's the uniqueness of SurgiBox, because it's not really, I guess it is software to some degree, but really it's also hardware that takes a lot of it. And I actually had another guest on the podcast. We really dived into the manufacturing process and how different that really is to actually deploying on a large scale, especially when you're talking large ROI type of experiments and environments, right? And I wouldn't even know where to begin to look into designing the machine that makes the machine, right? If there's any manufacturers out there that do really want to engage with Stash and believe in SurgiBox's journey, please do reach out to them because by having it deployed en masse, I would assume that you would have sort of warehouses or manufacturing partners all over the globe so that you could ship them out fast because obviously timing is very important for SurgiBox. That would be interesting to see what that looks like. But you mentioned something that really stuck with me in our previous conversation. Your real competitor isn't another product per se. It's real estate. Operating in theaters is really like $37 a minute, and in the UK alone, I think you mentioned it was like 30. The UK is spending like 38 billion a year just to clear surgical backlogs. So how has that industry gone this long without a solution like SurgiBox?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. At this space, especially the operating theater has not, the innovation has not been there, right? What, I mean, pun intended, we thought out of the box and out of the room. And when you really think about it, right, what really needs the environment that really needs to be clean during surgery is just above the incision, around the incision site. So by sizing down the problem, we're able to get to something that's portable, and you're able to enable this environment anywhere. Maybe I'll just give you the example. It's an analogy with the semiconductor industry as well, because before they had these very big clean rooms, and now they have kind of siloing the clean room into smaller spaces so that the
Mhm,
energy costs are going down. And I think that's the
mhm,
analogy that I have here. And obviously,
mhm.
it's a big paradigm shift.
The medical field often, at least to me, is a beast of its own, right? And people forget that it is also a business to some degree, to a lot of a degree, right? They still have to factor in bottom line. They still have to factor in these overheads and outgoing costs, right? And what SurgiBox really does, it look at that part of the business within health and understand, okay, well, we're not only solving the front end issue, but we also help resolving a back end issue, which really encompasses the vision of SurgiBox and the longevity. And I'm sure you would have been swept away from Deb coming into university, picking you up early, which is a great tactic, by the way. I got to give it to Deb because that's a very clever way of getting early adopters, but like believing in the vision because they're young and energetic at the time and, really want to help see this mission through. So I think that's a really great way to sort of source really good employees or really good co-founders. So that was really amazing. But you're running also a dual track go to market, co-led deployments paired with distribution partnerships across multiple regions simultaneously. There's a lot going on, right? For a small globally distributed team, that's a complex engine to manage. How do you keep it coordinated and moving forward?
That's a good question. I think, we were always a remote team. And so when COVID hit and like, oh, you have to stay home, like we didn't really get affected by that. I think in terms of communication, really our team works on WhatsApp mainly. And I think that's the best tool. And, we're always able to kind of pick up the call, and it's like we really operate in a 24/7 way with people
Mhm,
scattered around. So I think that's the advantage of having people around the globe. And in
mhm,
terms of, let's say, a distributors management, I think that's when we look at distributors, and I think what everyone should do, they are an extension of our own sales team. So they are
mhm,
part of our team. And so you have to have regular contacts and, push them, and they will also give you feedback, and they'll have to put
mhm.
priority on selling your products. So, they're not just outside, they're part of your team.
Yeah. I think with the way that SurgiBox is so unique because there's nothing like it in the market, right? You almost have to pave it your own way and see what does that look like when it comes down to deployment. I would also agree that when we look at partners for distribution and obviously use cases, those really are your salespeople, right? Because they're the people that are not only going to use it potentially, hopefully not, but they're going to use it, but they're going to understand it deeply in order to have and distribute it. So it's a very unique business model at the same time. I hate to say business model because it is a business to some degree, but it's a business with a very heavy mission. So what do we call that? I don't know. What do we call that?
It's how business should be done.
Yeah, you're right, actually. And I think that's a common theme here on this podcast because we do have a lot of founders that are super passionate about what they do, and I love that, right? And it's actually genuinely from a point and perspective of how do we actually help the end person? Like generally we have like software based founders on here or tech founders, and everyone starts with a very strong mission. Typically what happens, we get bogged down in operations and we start to lose that passion a little bit. But I don't feel that with SurgiBox because I think SurgiBox was founded back in 2017. So we're coming up to a decade and it's still going strong, obviously. So it tells me that the founding team, but the partners and the distributors all believe in the mission. And I think it's not hard to believe in the mission once you see what SurgiBox can really do. So it's really unique, and I'm really excited to see how SurgiBox really takes over this world by means of looking at those components. Now, you've got two very distinct customer profiles: governments and defense forces on one side, private surgeons and smaller clinics on the other side. Do you approach those as completely separate entities and sales motions, or is there an overlap in how you build the case for each?
Yeah. So I think that that's very interesting, and it's also, I think, very geographically different. Whether you go to India or whether you go to Jordan, it's very different, right? So the first thing is you have to navigate between the sales cycles, because governments is really kind of health ministry and militaries as well as emergency preparedness, and each government operates in a different way, and you have different key opinion leaders, and that's a long sales cycle, right? So if you plant a seed today, you might see sales in 12 to 18 months. Um, and then you have that's what is important is for the larger groups. I would say that the big hospitals, governments, and military, they kind of operate in the same way, is 12 to 18 months decision cycles, but they're very big orders. And then you have smaller groups who operate in a much more nimble way. In the end, in terms of the customer journey, you have awareness raising, you have consideration activities, you have trial runs, and then you have basically larger contracts. So here, where you have longer sales cycles, where the consideration part of it will take much longer with bigger groups, because they have to involve many more parties and all this. Whereas you have these private surgeons who can just do this, and they'll just purchase kits and they'll start doing the work because they don't rely on many layers of decision. I hope that was.
Yeah, the way that you described it kind of does bring it back to a very standardized business model where in any business, really, regardless of industry, whether it's hardware, software, anytime that the deal is bigger, there's a lot more layers to get filter through and get that consideration before we get the green light. So really judging by that, it doesn't really sound too different. And when we look at healthy pipelines from a sales perspective, you want to have a good mix of both. So you can have those early wins, but you're having the bigger contracts or the bigger deals working in the background, because then it makes sense to work over time and it's a compounding effect. Now, you mentioned that government cycles do typically run from 12 to 18 months. And you're navigating that alongside shorter sales cycles with clinics to keep the momentum and keep a healthy pipeline. How are you thinking about building a repeatable revenue engine across both tracks without the team getting pulled completely in different directions?
Yeah, I think here it's very important to define the roles of each team member. And I think this is the common thing that I've seen. If everyone has their own role, they won't step on each other's toes. So we have in our team really government specialists, and then we have medical device sales specialists for hospitals and clinics. And so really each person is targeting their own segment. They have their own distributors that they follow on a weekly basis. And I think that's how we're kind of ensuring that we're not stretching ourselves thin. Also, I think that it's important to focus on, let's say that the team at 100% capacity, 80% of the team's capacity will be in one or two beachhead. And then the 20% is really on pushing the distributors and having a weekly meeting with them and pushing them. And also all the activities that we are doing. So this is where, the consideration aspect, where you said it's very similar to all the other businesses. Well, actually not, because you have to convince, compared to traditional business, you have to convince a couple of people, right? It has to be clinically sound. So you have to convince the surgeons that this is actually clinically sound. Second one, you have to convince procurement. So you have to make the business case. And so you have all these layers of complexity that are, let's say, different from a traditional SaaS business or B2C, right? Because you have all these different layers coming up. And you have the regulatory aspects, risk assessments, all of these things that come into play in medical devices.
You kind of touch on the use cases and who do we need to consider to make this obviously like a signed deal or a closed contract, right? What kind of pushback do you typically see or a little bit of resistance when it comes down to building a business case from a commercial standpoint, so a procurement standpoint, and then simultaneously building it from a surgically sound standpoint? What type of resistance do you see from both sides?
So, in terms of a clinical, right, I think it's a paradigm shift. For the last, I don't know how many ever centuries, yeah, yeah, surgeons have always operated in an operating theater. And so
Mhm,
that's so ingrained in their mind that you have a couple of champions who are willing to try and who are amazing in our team and also in our partners. And I think that really it's all about, key opinion leader and then influencing the others. I think
mhm,
there really it's important to have a very rigorous and scientific approach in
mhm,
terms of collecting the post-market clinical data, how each surgery has been done. And, you have
mhm.
to put them in confidence that,
Yeah.
okay, this is there, it's different, but it works. Many people have tried it and it works and it's safe to use. And it's safe
Mhm.
to use not just for the surgeon's perspective, but what's important is that it's a very high quality product and you're not taking any shortcuts to treat your patients.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I would assume anytime you talk to like a health professional, the conversation is very different, right? They are going to want to see the hard facts and the hard numbers and what does that look like? And you are tackling an industry that's very hard, that's never been changed, really. The upward hill battle is pretty steep. But I think you are getting there. Like SurgiBox is getting there because you wouldn't be around for almost a decade if people didn't see the vision or the product didn't work at the end of the day. So I do have one last question for you. When SurgiBox sits at the intersection of global health equity, crisis response, and surgical innovation, right? You're doing quite a lot all in one go. And you're doing it as a small distribution team. A lot of founders look at that problem as this big and either walk away or wait for someone else to solve it. What keeps you building this? And what would you say to a founder who's starting staring down a problem that feels too hard or too slow to be worth it?
It's first keep going. It's really worth it. I think, especially in terms of medical devices, it takes a long time and especially, so you have the hardware part. So you have to make the machine that makes the machine, and you have to fundraise to do that. And then you have to certify the safety of your device. So that's really like a very long, just even before you get to the market. So whatever
Mhm,
lessons that come from software, like, oh yeah, push your product, test it, come back, it's a bit different, right? Because of all these different barriers. But then you're getting what I think what keeps me at every day today yesterday is some beautiful stories that today we have an impact. I know that the
mhm,
world is not a beautiful place, but at least the stories that we got from Burma, where you have a woman that had a mastectomy and she had it in a safe environment, or
mhm,
you have all these stories where you have really desperate people who are seeking surgical care in a safe environment and they're able to get it. And most importantly, when today there is like a climate related crisis or everywhere, I can do something about it with what I'm doing. And getting these
mhm.
stories of patients getting access to surgery and life saved, this is what is worth it. We're still at the beginning, but every day now we're getting a new story of a patient that's been saved. And I think this is what is the essence of what we're doing, and it's worth it.
Yeah, you are literally saving people's lives. So there's no better stories or there's no better use cases to use than this because it's so powerful and it's so impactful. Sasha, thank you so much. This has been genuinely a fascinating conversation. The dual market strategy, the regulatory complexity, the sheer scale of what SurgiBox is trying to move. I think a lot of founders are going to hear this and realize that the problem they're building for is a lot smaller than they thought. And that's not a bad thing. But links to connect with Sasha and the SurgiBox team will be listed down below with the show notes. And if you're a founder who's ready to build a sales engine that actually converts, you know where to find me. But in the meantime, keep building meaningfully. And thank you for joining us today, Sasha.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure.